Hello everybody, welcome to the latest episode of Games Up Podcast. My name is Cameron and I hope you have had a good week. Just me this week, I'm afraid. Hope you had the opportunity to play some good stuff over the week, and let's get down to the show. We start, as we do every week, with the news, and the first piece of news is that Borderlands producer Randy Pitchford thinks the game's cartoony aesthetic holds the series back. He said during an episode of IGN Unfiltered, which is hosted by Ryan McCaffrey, and it's like a deep dive into the world of video games and the people who make them, and the businesses they've been part of, and the developers they've been part of before. It's an amazing series, and you should absolutely check it out. We'll post a link to it in the comments in the description below. Borderlands producer said on the latest episode of the show that he thinks that the game's cartoony aesthetic holds it back from being sellable to the average consumer who don't want that kind of thing, and especially didn't want that kind of look when the original game came out. Now this makes some sense, because when the original game was first revealed, they didn't have a cartoony aesthetic. It looked like a realistic, or as realistic as they looked back then, game, and then they switched it up for the cartoon aesthetic because it's a bit kind of crazy and they wanted the look to fit that. I think it was a good idea, and I think that I don't think it's going to be a big issue for the series going forward. I think people know Borderlands because of the way it looks, and it's become unique because of the way it looks, so I think that's actually going to do it some good in the long run. But I can understand what he's saying here about the industry at the time. Quick add-on note here, he also says that he isn't sad about Borderlands 2's sales, but in the grand scheme of things and the amount of units a game can sell, 12 million units kind of sucks. I think he said this in a kind of jokey way. I think it's like, yeah, we always have aspirations to sell more, but even so, that's a kind of worrying sentiment. 12 million units is amazing. Borderlands 2 has sold far better than anyone thought it could, because Borderlands 1 did not sell as well as people were thinking, or certainly not as well in comparison as Borderlands 2 did. So Borderlands 2 has really outdone itself, and rightfully so. It's a great game. I really hope they don't over-expect on the next one. I don't think the next one is going to sell 30 million, 40 million, I don't think it's going to be doing GTA numbers by any means, and I hope they don't expect that of it. I hope they stay realistic, and put that, put the resources into it realistically so that we get the right game rather than a game that's made to sell, because that would be kind of worrying. We've seen, big problems with that with Tomb Raider at Square Enix before. The second piece of news this week is that the Olympic Games Committee has said that it will not include violent video games into its consideration for the Olympic Games in the future, as it wants to maintain its Olympic ideals no matter what activity is being competed in. Now, this is a kind of weird story to talk about because they haven't openly said what they're considering. Obviously, that's a bit of a while away, but they have said what they aren't considering: violent video games. Which leads you to ask, what kind of things does that come under? It makes sense that Overwatch won't be in the Olympics. Kind of a shame, but it makes sense. It makes a lot more sense that Counter-Strike, for example, wouldn't be, Halo wouldn't be, COD wouldn't be. But it does leave you wondering what's in the running. Like, something they mentioned was maybe a good example of a game that would work would be something where you're playing in a sport in the game that you could play in the real world, i.e. FIFA or the NBA 2K series. But this leads you to wonder, what's the point in adding it in that case? It's not to say that those games aren't good as esports, it's just to say that having an esport in the middle of a sports competition that just looks like another sport really kind of undermines what esports can bring to the table. This also leads to the question of, does this allow you to include Rocket League into consideration? Because Rocket League can be violent, you can blow people up and stuff, but does that become violent enough that they won't consider it, or not violent enough that they will? It would be nice to get a little bit more clarification on this, but really, any kind of big decision on this is probably a while away, so it's a bit much to be talking about it this early. Just interesting to know that that's what they're considering and the route that they're going to go down. News number 3 this week is that Shadow of War, the sequel to Shadow of Mordor, I like calling it Shadow of Mordor, is immortalising one of its own developers in a DLC. Michael David Forgy played a really big part in the creation of Shadow of War, and he will be a character that players can pay to have save them in dire situations, so he comes back and revives you, I believe. An extra part of this news story is that some of the cost of the DLC will be going back to the 4G family. So they will, it's kind of charitable what they're doing. You pay for the DLC and some of the money will go back to the family. It's a shame in a way that Monolith are taking any money for this, but it doesn't seem to be a huge amount. The DLC costs $4.99, and Monolith, the studios, or WB, whoever gets that money, is taking $1.49 of it. So not a huge amount in the grand scheme of things, but it's a shame. I guess like DLC always costs, and that may well just be covering costs of stuff, but you can understand how that's a bit of a dodgy thing to do, and I don't think this is something extra that they're doing. This is something that they're adding to the game, and it's a really nice thing to be doing. But nobody would have slated them if it wasn't there. So for them to have brought it forward and then take some of the money of it, that they're just sort of putting on the table that they're taking money from it. Like, they're making it easier to discover that they're taking money from it, if that makes sense. Again, I don't think that's a massive problem, and I think what they're doing is really, really nice. Developers deserve more respect for the amount of time and effort and the amount of their life they put into video game development. And if you don't believe that, look up anything about crunch time. Some of the lengths that developers go to get their games out is absurd. And so showing them as much respect as possible, even if it's posthumously, is a really nice thing to do. Would have just been nice for Monolith to be a little bit more transparent on where that money's going, and why they're taking it. But their business is their business. Penultimate piece of news this week, Telltale has announced that they are super interested in making a Black Mirror game. This would be fan-fucking-tastic. I'll tell you the rest of the story. Whilst they made it very clear that they have nothing on the table right now, they expressed extreme interest in creating a game from the series, and even asked Charlie Brooker, who's the head writer of the series, to reach out to them. I cannot tell you how exciting or interesting a Black Mirror game would be. Telltale would be a great fit, but I also feel like there's some other good fits as well. So David Cage would make an awesome Black Mirror game, especially if Detroit Become Human is anything to go by. I think Rocksteady could make a really, really good Black Mirror game. The kind of stuff that they did in Arkham Asylum with Scarecrow was super weird, super kind of fuck with you a little bit, and that kind of meta fuck with you would make a lot of sense for a Black Mirror game. Telltale obviously could be fantastic at it because they tell really good stories. I think Fulbright would make a really good Black Mirror game as well. Their more quiet, more existential tone, and the way that they approach video games would make a lot of sense for Black Mirror. Either way, though, a Black Mirror video game, no matter who it's from, would be awesome, and I'd absolutely love to see it happen. And finally this week, Pokemon Go added a bunch of new content that nobody was really expecting. Another series of legendary raids and a change to the way that they're going to be doing Mewtwo raids in the coming week, as well as a few extra little bits of housekeeping. Seeing as nobody was expecting it, lots of people have been picking up the game and going out and getting new content that they didn't expect to be there, so that made me think, I want to try and convince you to pick up Pokemon Go. So that leads us into our topic of the week this week, and our topic of the week is 5 reasons that you should give Pokemon Go another try. The first reason is the most basic, and the reasons will get hopefully a bit more compelling as we go along, but the first reason is the game works now. When it first came out, for the first couple of weeks that people were picking it up, it was a massive fad, one that Niantic couldn't really expect the success of, so the game was plagued with crashes and all sorts of problems. Well, the game works now. There's no more crashes, and getting into the game is as easy as possible. And when you're in the game, the gameplay experience is basically silky smooth and much improved thanks to a bunch of patches. So if you didn't play the game before because you literally couldn't, you can now. The second reason is new content. Most people, myself included, picked up Pokemon Go because of a sense of nostalgia, right? There was Gen 1, we all knew Gen 1, so we picked it up and tried to play it. Well, there's now Gen 2 as well, and with Gen 2 there's been a bunch of new content added, like new raids, new gyms, new items, and they've made the gameplay 10 times better. It's a lot better than it was, and a lot less basic than it was at launch, and so the gameplay experience is much deeper and much easier to really work through. It's taken a big step forward for the game, and the community has made strides with it as well, developing tools to help you understand where your Pokemon are coming from and where's best to catch them, how stuff like biomes and nests work, and the kind of tools you'll need to really get the best out of it if you want the best out of it. Speaking of new content, raids are one of the best reasons to play the game. It's the biggest change to the gameplay in its entire lifespan, and one of the best changes as well. And the reason is because of the communities you need for raiding. So raids are a big boss battle that takes place in the real world that need lots of people to come together to join in and defeat them. They bring people together from all over cities and further, and you'll go out and join into teams of people all working to defeat a boss in the real world. The people you meet will be varied and fun, and working together for a shared goal gives you a really, really great feeling of team spirit. It's a great way to get an understanding of how brilliant and how passionately engaged the community behind Pokemon Go is, and the kind of people that help bring other people together to defeat this kind of stuff. If you're not too interested in the Pokemon, you might be more interested in the people you'll meet and just playing with them. It can be a really great experience. Reason number 4 is to improve walking. As the nights draw in and the cold gets colder, at least here in the UK, it's likely that your daily walk to work is going to get darker, colder, and suck that little bit more. The thing is, though, that you can play Pokemon without having to do anything more than just turn your phone on, meaning that you can make your daily walk to work that little bit better. You can change it from a daily chore that you have to do to an opportunity to find something rare, or hatch something new, or pick up something that was interesting, or see something you haven't seen before. From my perspective, it's made me want to walk a lot more since the game came out. And there may even arguably be some health benefits if you're finding ways to walk a few more minutes to work than you did before. And finally, and I think this is one of the most compelling reasons, is exploration. One of the main ways you interact with the game world is through Pokestops. They supply you items that you'll need to play the game. But these Pokestops are often based on little landmarks that are nearby you that you might not have noticed. Interacting with these Pokestops, reading them and maybe where they came from or the backstory that some of them have listed is a great way to learn about the places around you without having to go majorly out of your way. Maybe you've wondered what a building was named, or a church was named, or what it was called, or what purpose it served. Well, we found a huge amount of information about my local area by just clicking on Pokestops that I would have clicked on anyway. It can be a great way to learn about a place, whether it's somewhere new to you, like when you're on holiday, or somewhere you know every day, like your walk to work, without having to really go out of your way. And it adds to a game that's a lot more fun than it was, and can be a lot more beneficial than it was as well. So mainly, the 5 reasons I think you should play Pokemon Go is because the game is much more fun than it once was before, because it's encouraging real people to get together and interact together for a shared goal, because it's making walking a lot more fun and giving you a kind of instant gratification reward for doing walking, and because it's made it a lot easier to get to know the places around you and a little bit of information about them. Maybe that's something you see every day and a little fact you didn't know about it before, or maybe it's somewhere you're completely new to and learning through a game. Either way, it's a lot better than it once was, it's a lot more improved than it once was, and the community behind it are a lot more visible as well. I think you should pick it up. If you don't like it after a week, well, then delete it, and it doesn't really make a big difference. But if you do like it, you might find yourself walking more, you might find yourself interacting with new people, or maybe you'll just find yourself picking up some new Pokemon. Either way, I'd say all 3 are good benefits. That, ladies and gentlemen, is this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. It really makes a massive difference to us, and we appreciate your support. If you feel like supporting us a little bit more, you can subscribe to us on YouTube, where we publish the show every week at 6:30 on a Monday, or on iTunes, where we publish the show earlier that day so you can get it on your way to work. If you feel like liking and sharing it to people so that we get out in front of a few more faces, we'd love that as well. But other than that, we'll see you next week, and until then, the game's over.